The following is an excerpt from the book Experiences of Thought by Anthony Kahn, available now on Amazon.com and Kindle. Loving logic and matters of mind. Symbolmindedness. As human beings, we are very much limited in terms of the amount of complexity we can effectively work with. It is natural and inevitable that we must organize and categorize lest we end up completely drowning in a flood of information. But it is very important, nevertheless, to be aware that we are constantly engaging in this process. We just spoke of the limitations of mere words, and that limitation emerges in large part out of the fact that words are actually nothing more than symbols. Symbols, by definition, are not the thing they describe, but rather representations that have come to carry meaning associated with more complex things, ideas, and experiences. Just as we discussed in Section 1.4 and Section 1.5, we are always building models to represent the world around us, but it is important to remember that our models are not the same thing as the world around us. When you study just about any field in depth, you will begin to become acquainted with the various ways in which information becomes organized into categories, so as to give structure and codify relationships between observed types of whatever phenomenon is being dealt with. A classic example can be found in the custom of breaking the animal kingdom down into a hierarchy of taxonomic ranks, such as class, order, genus, and species. Some organisms that share some particular common feature will all be put into the same bucket. This is obviously an extremely useful practice, which is why it is observed so frequently. But one must always remember that when we organize information into groups, we are dealing with just one marginalization of the data in the statistical sense of the word. We can describe any entity, be it an atom or a human being, via a list of variables that, in the case of the latter, could number in the billions. We can hence organize such complex organisms as human beings into just about any number of meaningful groups. You might find yourself grouped with one individual via one particular grouping methodology, and then grouped with a completely different set of individuals under another grouping regime. The key word here is individual, because that is what we all are. You can never define us by one particular group because there are a billion other properties that we possess also. And to define by one parameter only is to marginalize over all the other properties that define us. Organizing data into groups is useful, but it can be dangerous if the grouping is taken to convey more information than it really does. Unfortunately, it is part of our nature as human beings that we are all afflicted with some degree of what we shall label here symbol-mindedness. We inevitably have limited understanding of our world and limited capacity to comprehend the boundless complexity innate to all aspects of nature. It is no one's fault that we tend to approximate reality with symbolic representations as it comes out of necessity, but we really must at least be aware that we are doing it. Political correctness is a buzzword in the world of today, and we are extremely conscious of race and gender in particular. But it is a curious state of affairs given that we can organize human beings into millions of other groups besides just these two. Governments, at least in the Western world, are falling over themselves to be seen to address race and gender divides, but it would seem that they are so acutely sensitive of their appearance as to be impotent of achieving any real good. This is perhaps not surprising, given that the result of the next election depends largely upon their perceived values. Legislation supposedly intended to unify and provide equality seems to be geared towards symbolic gestures, rather than really addressing the underlying issues at a deeper level. We hear of governments proudly touting figures of equal representation of various minority groups among the higher echelons of government and industry. But what is happening further down the tree and in its roots, obscured from the public eye? There is nothing laudable about promoting some candidate to fulfill some role because of some specific trait that has no bearing on the job. True equality is only ever going to be achieved when issues that divide society are addressed at their source. And in order to have any hope of achieving this, we are first going to have to put single parameters of identity, such as race and gender, into their proper perspective. The more we fixate on them and legislate around them, the more we will inevitably divide society along their trivial boundaries. Everything in the world is the way it is today because of how it was yesterday. The best thing we can therefore do is to make sure that today will be a great yesterday when tomorrow comes around. The only way we are going to accomplish this is by growing in our collective understanding, by reflecting deeply on how we think and understand the world. We are not in our entirety that which symbolically is used to describe us. The world and everything in it is full of such intricacies that we are all full of ignorance as to its true deeper nature. It is no good pointing the finger at anyone else and labeling them as ignorant or prejudiced unless we are equally willing to see our own lack of understanding. We all think in simplified and symbolic ways because that is human nature. We are all collectively responsible for the state of the world because we all share the frailties that have made it the way it is. Symbolism can be an effective way to convey certain ideas and draw attention to particular aspects of reality, but we must be ever cautious not to conflate symbolism with the entirety of reality. It is perhaps altogether safer if we reserve symbolism for illustrative purposes within art and literature and endeavor to be analytical in our treatment of everything else.